if you were a fan of Goblincore, Cottagecore, Fairy Tale Core, Hobbycore, and most other aesthetics, might I present to you my newest DIY. It's a mushroom wreath. I based it off one from Joann Fabrics because they never had it in stock. And it was way more fun to make, and it's a lot more beautiful and intricate than the Joann Fabrics ever could have been. And if you're interested in watching my process, just join me and keep on watching. Hello, let's get into it. Let's start painting some mushrooms, shall we? I put my butt outside in the scorching hot sun and got a farmer's burn all for you for the sake of making this aesthetic painting video. I stuck with neutral colors at first, painting these mushrooms. I did a few trial runs on my other mushrooms that are already painted here on the table, but of course my footage didn't work out for that. But I stuck with white for blending mostly and mixing colors, yellow, beige, brown, and forest green. Here I decided I'm going to be fancy. I'm going to be fancy into a base color of white. Well, that doesn't work if the paint dries immediately in the hot sun. So I added the beige color and kind of got that mushroom vibe going on. Again, I did not use any reference photos. Maybe I should have. Oh well, it's too late now. The wreath is made. It's on my wall. But I did beige. I added darker brown in the little rivets and the textures to give it a little more definition, and then I blended the two a bit more too, because at some point it started looking like the type of mushrooms that you eat on a pizza, and I was just not feeling that vibe. I did not want pizza wreath vibes. I wanted Hobbit mushroom fantasy forest vibes. So I went through a lot of layers of paint to achieve the right shade of mushroom stem. And I really struggled out in the heat because the paint was drying so fast and I really couldn't blend it because it was drying up on the clay first of all, but then also in the sun. I wanted this mushroom to match this other yellow mushroom I had painted the other day. I mixed like a beige and a yellow. I never wanted to use the bright yellow. I wanted more muted tones. So here I am painting that cap. Oh, and let me tell you, I layered this bad boy so many times to get the right shade of yellow because I didn't want it to be dull or look dirty, but I also didn't want it to be too bright. Is anybody else going to notice that? No, but I am, because that's who I am. Overcritical. So here is the perfect shade of yellow, at least to Haley on this day after several layers. And I just left it there to bake in the sun and dry up. And then I started going back in for a little more detail work on this previously painted mushroom. As you can see, this one has an alligator clip and some of the other mushrooms don't. I just wanted to be able to move some and then to glue some. To each his their own. Either way worked. I'm not complaining about either way. You can clip them on and move them, or you can glue them in. I ended up painting this guy a lot, and then by the end of the day, I dipped him in glue and covered him in blue glitter because I hated the colors on him so much. But the glitter gave it a really cool texture at the end of the day. You'll see in the reveal, and I love it so much more. And the blue added a nice, different fantasy color scheme to the wreath that I don't think I would have got had I stayed with this same color palette. Now for the green ones, I started with a layer of the forest green and then just started layering the light yellow over top, and that kind of gave me a nice good array of greens, from forest greens to like a soft light mossy green. I did another yellow cap, but this time I wanted to put dots on it, so I just went in. First I did bigger white dots and then went around pin pricking little white dots with paint. As you can see, super time consuming, and I want to say it's a little difficult, but it's only going to be difficult if you make it difficult on yourself and expect perfection, which it's a mushroom, and I had to keep telling myself mushrooms and practically everything in nature isn't perfect. So that's what's really going to make it feel realistic, is if I don't go too hard on making a Super Mario version mushroom. Rather, I want a more realistic feel. Onto the morals. These were the worst things to paint. Oh my gosh, if you guys can think of a better way, please tell me. I went in and I shoved the paint in each little crevice, and I did it several times, and there would still be parts I did not cover. There are still specks of white. So I went in with this yellowy beige color inside because they're kind of translucent inside, and on the outside they're a little bit brown. So I would just wait till the inside caverns were dry, and then I coated it in a lighter beigey dark brown. But oh, never again. The outcome was really nice though, but still, it was so time consuming, and it was so heartbreaking after you did your brown layer to see any white on the inside caverns of those suckers. But I liked painting them with them on my thumb. Highly suggest going about doing it that way. This was one I had painted earlier, and I did not know about the translucency of this type of mushroom. So I had just painted it all brown, and it just looked like a turd on a stick. So I went back in and did the more translucent beigey yellow inside the caverns, holes, caves, I don't know what you call them, these little spots. And then after that dried again, I went back over to brown. Again, a lot of them just ended up looking like turds, but oh well. So on to my favorite part of my wreath actually is those little tree fungi, guys. So I started with a very, very, very pale yellow, mostly white, and then a smidge of yellow paint. And I went in and did a layer of that because I was really going for that like super realistic replica, and it just didn't stand out the way. It didn't really fit right with the wood tone of the wreath. So eventually I just kind of got off my high horse of like making accurate fungus growths and mushrooms, and just leaned into what color palette I thought looked good. And that ended up being a more like warmer, almost orangey tone. And I ended up painting them darker in the middle and like smoothing them out, kind of like an ombre color. You're gonna see that in a minute. I just wanted to show you the whole process of this because I do think, although I didn't like the first color I painted them, I think it helped with the ombre effect. So there's no rhyme or reason to my color mixing. As you can see, it's a mess, and I'm sure some people absolutely hate the way I paint, but I just put some red in the beigey yellow I painted the mushrooms with until I got a color I liked. And I just went for it. I started underneath because I feel like they're usually darker underneath. And then it lightens out as it grows, and then it's lighter on top towards the ends. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but you know what? When I think about these types of mushrooms or fungus, I don't know what you call it. But when I think about them, this is what I picture, and that is the ultimate goal. I realized I don't want the exact same Joann Fabrics wreath that I saw, especially after seeing a lot of the review images. It ended up looking like crap. I just wanted it to be dynamic and interesting to look at and magical, and I wanted it to look like its own little ecosystem, like its own little magical mushroom world on this small little circular wreath. I finally achieved the look. I used a fan brush a few times to help kind of like spread the paint out a bit, but I ended up using my fingers a lot too, and that seemed to work really great. But here I am finishing it up, taking a breather because I was exhausted. So now we can get on to our next step, which realistically I took about a month and a half break between starting this project and finishing it. So these poor little mushrooms stayed in a little tub until I got the motivation to finally put them on this poor plain wreath. As you can see, I ended up glittering a few mushrooms that I just did not like the paint on, and they looked so cute and the texture was great. I already mentioned that, but just wanted to mention it again because if you're not much of a painter, honestly, you can do a plain coat of paint, glue, and then some glitter, and it'll look fantastic. So after you have all your components ready, it is about arranging the wreath. So this process, depending on how particular you are, can take a very long time. Case in point, myself. I rearranged this sucker so many times, had a breakdown, rearranged it again, had another breakdown, gave up, and then came back to it and finally got the result I liked. I like this type of wreath, but then I also don't like it. So the way it's formed, there were some like pockets that I could just shove the mushrooms in and they stayed. I was like, this is great. I don't even have to glue them, right? I'll just poke them through. But then there are other places where I really wanted a mushroom. It really needs to be like dynamic dimension the mushroom would bring to the spot. But I'm gonna have to figure out a way to make it stay, which also seems impossible on this type of wreath. So I just kept going back to the drawing board, but that's okay. That is what days off are for. Did I get my laundry done? No. Did I sweep my floors? No. But you know what? I got an adorable wreath by the end of this day. But in hindsight, I think I could have just been a little more loosey-goosey with it. But here I am. I'm just trying to see color-wise, size-wise, and height-wise what I like grouped together, how I like it looking as a whole. But also a missing component is I want to be adding moss by the end of this, so I wanted to see what I wanted to be a fixed part of the wreath without the moss. So there were some mushrooms I knew I wanted glued to the wreath before I added any greenery, and then there were some mushrooms that I just wanted to add on top of the moss to give it, again, more dimension and more definition. So honestly, my advice for this is just don't give up. Make it how you want it. Don't be afraid to do something weird, because it'll work out in the end. I promise. So this is for the most part, the arrangement that I liked. And if you were interested in weird crafting angles, here is one right in front of me as I glue these suckers on. But first, I'm going to show you all my struggles with the freaking tacky glue, which I love but also hate. So gluing was its own battle. Like every other step in this process, I would glue them in and they just would keep moving. I could have used hot glue, but I just wasn't sure if hot glue would work with this clay, because I have used hot glue on this air dry clay before and it just falls off. It doesn't even stick. So I really just wanted to stick with tacky glue, because from my experience with this clay and tacky glue, it makes a really strong bond. So I just stuck with it. I stuck with my guns. So far, we're good. I've only lost one mushroom, but that's because my paint fell off it and not because the glue didn't work with it. So I just went in, glued them in, tried to find some pockets where they were already sturdy in the wreath without the glue, and then just kind of solidified the bond, especially with this one here. This little green guy gave me the most trouble. He was the one who hopped off at the end of the day, but I just re-glued him, and then I glued behind the cap portion of the mushroom, and that seemed to fix my problem. And I wasn't worried too much about making a mess with the glue. I smoothed it out just so there weren't any air bubbles, so I can ensure that it's really glued in there. But I knew I was going to be putting moss all over this bad boy, so the glue didn't matter because we'll just cover up our mistakes with moss. And that is the beauty of Cottagecore. Let me tell you, you made a mistake, what? Little chunk of moss. Nobody has to know. Nobody ever has to know about our mistakes when you have moss. Here's just a closer shot of those particularly glued in fungi. That was a joke, wasn't it good? So there's that before moss, and let me tell you, I had some panicking moments. And to summarize those moments, here's a TikTok.
I hate it so much.
Oh yeah, someone save me from myself. Look at that mushroom. I really hate it up close. Those were not my most confident moments, but let me show you as I started adding the moss, adding the lichen. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but I've never actually heard that word. So adding the moss just made this wreath come alive, and I loved it. I didn't glue it first. I just placed it to see what type of moss I wanted where. I wanted to see the coloring. I wanted to make everything look nice first. I used an old pimple popping tool to squish the moss in between the branches of the wreath. And that worked surprisingly well. Don't worry, I'm never going to use that thing again. It's old. It's strictly for weird craft uses, and it is currently in my junk drawer in my kitchen. So most of the moss, particularly the one around the yellow, orangey tree shelf mushrooms, I still don't know what the name is. I should research that. I work in a library. I should be researching all this stuff, but I'm not. I put the fluffier green moss around it, and I think it hid the glue and the unpainted clay parts of that spectacularly. And then some of that bumpier, rougher kind that you see growing on trees, I put that around it too, and then just kind of up top a bit to kind of tie in the whole thing. I didn't want all the moss to just be at the bottom. So I know you can't see the top, but I did put some up and around and in between the branches, and I used the glue I had, the tacky glue, very liberally. Do not be afraid to glue that moss down. And again, it's just kind of like the mushroom arranging. I just kept playing with it until it looked right to me. No right or wrong way. And no moss scientists better be coming up in my comments complaining about my arrangement, okay? Because it makes me happy, it brings me joy, and I don't care if it's scientifically accurate. This is my wreath, and you cannot tell me that these mushrooms and this moss types don't grow together. They are a happy little mushroom family, and nobody can tell me otherwise. And with a little more arrangement and glue, and one final chug of my cold brew, it is time for the reveal. There she is. Isn't she beautiful? First off, I would like to apologize for that crudely redone Halo theme song. But anyways, here she is. I'm so happy. It turned out so different than I expected, and so different than I intended to even make it, but I'm so happy with it. So here's some side-by-sides of my wreath versus actual reviewed purchases. So these are what the wreath looks like from Joann Fabrics from real customers. Not at all like what they advertise. But this is what you can have with just some clay, craft moss, a wreath, and glue. I hope you all enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.